Welcome to the Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we are about to pull out our magnifying glasses and act as detectives on a 2,000-year-old cold case. We're diving deep into one of history's most enduring, captivating, and honestly, hotly debated mysteries, the lost civilization of Atlantis.
Okay, let's dive into this. Was Atlantis a real empire, or just history's most successful work of fiction? It's a question that has haunted explorers, historians, and dreamers for literally centuries. Throughout this explainer, we're going to treat this question like a genuine investigation, sifting through the evidence, the wild theories, and the actual history to finally find the truth behind the legend.
So to start our investigation, we kind of have to look at the original police report, so to speak. The core definition of Atlantis comes to us entirely from the ancient Greek philosopher Plato. Around 360 BC, in his dialogues called Timaeus and Critias, Plato described a vast, wealthy empire just loaded with glorious architecture, a strong military, and advanced technology. But according to his account, this wasn't just a physical collapse, it was a moral one. The society suffered from intense moral decay, angered the gods, and was destroyed in a massive cataclysmic event, sinking to the ocean around 9600 BC.
Section 1. The Scene of the Crime, Plato's Ancient Blueprint.
Now, what is just wild here is the timeline. Plato is writing his account around 360 BC, but he claims Atlantis sank around 9600 BC. That is a staggering 9,000-year gap. Just to put that into perspective for a second, we are closer in time to Plato right now than Plato was to the supposed destruction of Atlantis. As detectives, this massive gap in time should immediately plant a seed of objective skepticism in our minds. I mean, how did a story survive for 9 millennia before anyone decided to write it down? But Plato didn't just give us a time frame. He gave us a highly specific location. He claimed Atlantis was located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which we know today as the Strait of Gibraltar. This single geographical clue is the smoking gun that sparked centuries of wild, obsessive hunts across the globe. Because Plato gave it a location, people believed it simply had to be found. Moving on to Section 2. The literalists, the lost continent hypothesis, and fringe geography. You know, the idea that Atlantis was a literal historical place on a map didn't really gain massive traction until the late 19th century. We start in 1882 with Ignatius Donnelly looking at the mid-Atlantic, then we jump to 1958 with Charles Hapgood proposing a shifting Antarctica, and finally, by the 1970s, Charles Berlitz brings us straight into the paranormal territory of the Bermuda Triangle. First up, we've got writer Ignatius Donnelly, who published Atlantis, the Antediluvian World back in 1882. His entire thesis was basically that ancient civilizations just weren't smart enough to invent things like metallurgy, language, or agriculture entirely on their own. He argued they must have inherited these advancements from an older, highly advanced, and currently doomed civilization. Donnelly stuck strictly to Plato's blueprint, placing a sunken continent right outside the Strait of Gibraltar in the mid-Atlantic, assuming the ocean was only a few hundred feet deep. But of course, modern oceanography and our current understanding of plate tectonics have completely destroyed this shifting waters theory. The ocean floor out there just does not hide a sunken continent. But the debunking of the mid-Atlantic theory didn't stop the literalists for a second. Actually, they just moved the target. Talk about an extreme real estate mix-up, right? Take Charles Berlitz in the 1970s, for example, claiming Atlantis fell victim to the Bermuda Triangle off the Bahamas. He pointed to underwater structures near Bimini as ancient streets. Those scientists have since proven they are entirely natural beach rock formations. Then you have Charles Hapgood in 1958 arguing that Atlantis is actually under Antarctica. He claimed that 12,000 years ago, a massive shift in the Earth's crust moved a temperate continent into the freezing south, literally burying the Atlanteans in ice. Just like with Donnelly, our modern scientific grasp of plate tectonics pokes massive holes in both of these fringe theories. Which brings us to Section 3, the historical echoes, real disasters inspiring myth. So since the literal geography completely falls apart, what if Atlantis wasn't a physical place perfectly preserved on a map, but rather a legendary distortion of real, terrifying historical cataclysms? One incredibly compelling theory looks at the Black Sea flood. Around 5600 BC, the Mediterranean Sea breached the Bosporus. It poured into what was then just a freshwater lake, flooding the Black Sea and raising the water level by hundreds of feet in perhaps less than a single year. Imagine you're living in a thriving civilization on that shore, and suddenly the ocean literally swallows your world. As those terrified inhabitants scattered, their very real tales of a devastating deluge would have been passed down.
Over thousands of years, it is highly likely that these stories evolved and exaggerated, eventually reaching Plato as the myth of a grand sunken city. And that concept brilliantly sets up our next point, because there is an even more direct historical echo right in Greece's own backyard, the Minoan civilization. Flourishing between 2500 and 1600 BC on the islands of Crete and Thera, historians consider the Minoans to be Europe's first great civilization. They built splendid palaces, constructed paved roads, and they were actually the very first Europeans to use a written language known as Linear A. They were wealthy, they were technologically advanced, and they were an island empire. They are literally the perfect real-world stand-in for Plato's Atlanteans. But then, disaster struck. Around 1600 BC, the Minoans experienced a cataclysm of just unimaginable proportions. An earthquake triggered the volcano on the island of Thera to erupt, and when it did, it spewed a staggering 10 million tons of rock, ash, and gas into the atmosphere. 10 million tons. The fallout from that eruption was absolutely apocalyptic. Massive tsunamis rippled outward, utterly wiping out coastal Minoan cities. This sudden devastation left this once great empire entirely vulnerable to invaders from the Greek mainland. Almost overnight, at the very height of their power, the Minoans were effectively erased from history. Connecting the dots here is just fascinating. This devastating, real-world cataclysm perfectly mirrors the sudden, tragic end of Plato's fictional Atlanteans. It's highly probable that the cultural memory of the Minoans' destruction served as the direct inspiration for Atlantis. But this brings us to the ultimate pivot in our investigation. We've chased the geographical theories across the globe. We've explored the very real historical disasters that could have inspired the tale. But now we have to ask the hardest question of all. What if it was all a myth? What if there is no underlying sunken empire at all?
Section 4. The verdict, the ultimate cautionary tale.
So here is where we land. The overwhelming consensus among modern historians and scientists is that Plato entirely invented the island empire. Why? Well, first, there is absolutely zero written record of Atlantis existing anywhere outside of Plato's specific dialogues. It is completely absent from all other surviving ancient Greek texts. Think about it. If this was a true historical superpower, someone else would have mentioned them, for sure. Furthermore, despite our incredible modern advances in oceanography and high-tech ocean floor mapping, we have found zero traces of any such sunken civilization. Which naturally leads us to the true nature of the story. Historians argue that Plato never intended to record a historical fact. Instead, he invented Atlantis as a vision of an ideal civilization and used its dramatic demise as a philosophical tool. It was, quote, a cautionary tale of the gods punishing human hubris. Plato was speaking directly to his peers, warning them about the very real dangers of moral decay, unchecked arrogance, and military overreach. The sinking of Atlantis wasn't a geography lesson, guys. It was a moral warning. And that brings us to the end of our explainer, but I want to leave you with one final lingering thought. If Plato's tale of a great civilization destroyed by its own hubris is just a warning, is our own modern world immune to a similar fate? The brilliance of Atlantis isn't found at the bottom of the ocean. It's found in its enduring power to hold a mirror right up to our own society, asking us to reflect on our own vulnerabilities and our own moral compass. Thank you so much for joining me on this investigation today. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.